Marcus Thompson pulled his truck into the driveway of his new home on Maple Street. The house was perfect. It had white walls, a red roof, and a big front yard with green grass. The moving truck was already there, waiting for him. His wife, Sarah, stepped out of her car and smiled. "This is it, honey. Our new home." Their daughter, Emma, who was 16 years old, looked around the neighborhood. "It looks nice here, Dad. Much quieter than our old place." Marcus nodded. After 15 long years in the Navy, he was ready for quiet. He had served his country as a Navy SEAL, going on dangerous missions around the world. Now at 42 years old, he just wanted to live a normal life with his family. The neighborhood was called Oakwood Estates. All the houses looked neat and clean. The streets were wide and safe. There were big trees everywhere and the lawns were well kept. Marcus could see children playing in some of the yards. It felt like a good place to raise Emma. "Let's start moving our things inside," Marcus said. He was a tall man with short brown hair and strong arms. Years of military training had kept him in good shape. But now he dressed like any other dad: jeans, a plain shirt, and work boots. The moving men helped them carry boxes and furniture into the house. Marcus was careful when they moved his gun safe. It was heavy and black, made of thick steel. He had bought it years ago to store his firearms safely and legally. The safe would go in his basement where it would be secure and out of sight. Sarah noticed some neighbors watching from their windows. "People seem curious about us," she said. "That's normal," Marcus replied. "New families always get attention." He waved at an older woman across the street. She waved back and smiled. By evening, most of their things were inside. Marcus and Sarah sat on their front porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset. Emma was in her room, setting up her computer, and talking to her friends from their old town. A man walked over from the house next door. He was about 60 years old with gray hair and a friendly face. "Hello there. I'm Jim Morrison. Welcome to the neighborhood." Marcus stood up and shook his hand. "Marcus Thompson, this is my wife Sarah." "Nice to meet you both," Jim said. "What brings you to Oakwood Estates?" "I just retired from the Navy," Marcus said. "We wanted a quiet place to settle down." Jim smiled. "Well, you picked the right spot. It's very peaceful here." "What did you do in the Navy?" Marcus kept his answer simple. Just regular Navy work, nothing too exciting. He did not mention that he was a SEAL. Most people did not need to know about his special training or the dangerous missions he had been on. "That's great. Thank you for your service," Jim said. "If you need anything, just let me know. I'm retired, too. Used to work for the city." Over the next few days, more neighbors came to introduce themselves. There was Mrs. Chen, who was the president of the neighborhood association. She was a kind Asian woman who brought them homemade cookies. There was also Bob and Linda, a young couple with 2 small children. Everyone seemed friendly and welcoming. Marcus spent his time setting up his home office and organizing his things. In the basement, he carefully arranged his gun collection in the safe. He had several rifles and handguns that he had collected over the years. All of them were legal and properly registered. He kept them clean and secure, just like he had learned in the military. Sarah found a job at a local school as a teacher. Emma started at the nearby high school and quickly made new friends. Marcus was happy to see his family settling in well. During the day, while Sarah and Emma were at work and school, Marcus would walk around the neighborhood. He liked to stay in shape, so he jogged every morning. The streets were safe and clean. He saw mailmen, delivery trucks, and people walking their dogs. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Marcus also spent time at the local gun range. It was important for him to keep his shooting skills sharp, even in retirement. At the range, he met other gun owners who lived in the area. They were all responsible people who followed the law and stored their weapons safely. One afternoon, Marcus was working in his garage when Mrs. Chen stopped by. "How are you settling in?" she asked. "Very well, thank you," Marcus said. "Everyone has been so kind." "We like to take care of each other here," Mrs. Chen said. "By the way, we have a neighborhood association meeting next week. You and Sarah should come." We discuss things like street repairs, community events, and safety. We'll be there, Marcus promised. Mrs. Chen looked around his neat garage. You keep everything very organized. Military training? Marcus smiled. Old habits die hard. That evening, Marcus told Sarah about the meeting. It will be good to get involved in the community, she said. Emma is already making friends and I love my new job. This move was the right choice. Marcus agreed. For the first time in years, he felt relaxed. No more dangerous missions or long deployments. No more worrying about enemies or watching his back constantly. He could just be a regular husband and father. He went to his basement and opened his gun safe to clean one of his rifles. As he worked, he thought about his military days. He had seen combat in several countries. He had trained for years to become one of the Navy's elite fighters, but all of that was behind him now. Marcus locked the safe and went upstairs. Sarah was helping Emma with her homework at the kitchen table. The house felt warm and happy. This was exactly what he had dreamed of during all those years of service, a normal family life in a safe neighborhood. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he listened to the quiet sounds of his new home. There were no gunshots, no explosions, no alarms, just the gentle sounds of wind in the trees and the occasional car driving by. It was perfect. He did not know that very soon, his peaceful new life would be tested. Someone was watching the neighborhood, looking for houses like his. Someone who thought they could take advantage of what seemed like an ordinary suburban family. But Marcus Thompson was far from ordinary, and when trouble came to his door, those people would learn that some retired military men never really stopped being soldiers. 3 months had passed since Marcus and his family moved to Oakwood Estates. Life was good. Emma was doing well in school and had made several close friends. Sarah loved teaching at the local elementary school. Marcus had settled into a comfortable routine of morning runs, home projects, and occasional visits to the gun range. It was a Tuesday morning in late fall. The leaves on the trees had turned orange and red. Marcus was in his garage organizing some tools when he heard a car pull into his driveway. He looked up to see a white sedan with 2 men inside. The men got out of the car and walked toward him. They were both wearing dark blue polo shirts and carrying clipboards. The first man was tall and thin with blonde hair. The second man was shorter and had a thick mustache. Both men looked to be in their 30s. "Good morning," the tall man said with a big smile. "Are you Marcus Thompson?" "Yes, I am," Marcus replied. Something about these men made him feel uneasy, but he could not say exactly what it was. Maybe it was their fake smiles, or the way they stood too close to him. "Great! I'm Derek Walsh, and this is my partner Tony Martinez. We're HOA security officers for Oakwood Estates." The man named Derek pulled out a small badge from his pocket and showed it to Marcus quickly. Marcus looked at the badge, but Derek put it away too fast for him to read it properly. "HOA security officers? I've never heard of that position before." "It's a new program," Tony said. His voice was rough, like he smoked too many cigarettes. "The neighborhood association hired us to make sure everyone is following the safety rules." Derek nodded and looked at his clipboard. "We're here to do a mandatory safety inspection of your home. It won't take long." Marcus felt his military training kick in. Something was wrong here. In his 15 years as a Navy SEAL, he had learned to trust his instincts. These men did not feel right. Their body language was off. They seemed nervous and kept looking around instead of making direct eye contact. "What kind of safety inspection?" Marcus asked. "Just the usual stuff," Derek said, waving his hand like it was no big deal. "We check smoke detectors, make sure windows lock properly, look for any dangerous items that might not be stored correctly." Tony stepped closer. "We've had reports of some residents keeping unauthorized weapons in their homes. The HOA wants to make sure everyone is following proper storage rules." Now Marcus was really suspicious. How did these men know he owned guns? He had been very careful about keeping his firearms private. He never talked about them with neighbors, and his gun safe was hidden in his basement where no one could see it. "I'll need to see some official paperwork," Marcus said calmly. And I'd like to call the HOA president to confirm this inspection. Derek's smile faded a little. Sir, we don't have time for all that. We have many homes to visit today. This inspection is required by neighborhood rules. If you don't cooperate, you could face fines. That's right, Tony added. The HOA has the authority to inspect any home in the neighborhood. It's in the contract you signed when you bought your house. Marcus had read his HOA contract very carefully. There was nothing in it about mandatory inspections or security officers. These men were lying to him. But why? I understand you have a job to do, Marcus said politely. But I'm not comfortable letting strangers into my home without proper documentation. Could you come back tomorrow with official papers from the HOA? Derek and Tony looked at each other. Marcus could see they were getting frustrated. Derek's friendly smile was completely gone now. Look, Mr. Thompson, Derek said, his voice getting harder. We're trying to be nice here, but this inspection is happening today whether you like it or not. We have reports that you might be storing firearms illegally. Who made these reports? Marcus asked. That's confidential information, Tony said. Just let us do our job, and we'll be out of your hair in 15 minutes. Marcus crossed his arms. Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property. If you want to inspect my home, bring proper legal documents and schedule an appointment. Derek stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. You're making a big mistake, Thompson. The HOA doesn't like residents who don't cooperate. You could lose your home over this. Marcus did not move. In the military, he had faced much scarier people than these two. I think you're the ones making a mistake. Please leave now. Tony pointed his finger at Marcus. We know you have guns in there. The neighborhood has a right to know if someone is keeping dangerous weapons around families and children. This confirmed Marcus's suspicions. These men were definitely not from the HOA. They seemed to know about his firearms, which meant they had been watching him or investigating him somehow. But why? I'm asking you one more time to leave, Marcus said. His voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. If you don't go, I'll call the police. Derek laughed, but it sounded forced. Call them, we have every right to be here. Marcus pulled out his cell phone. Fine. Let's see what the police say about this. Suddenly, both men seemed to realize they had made a mistake. Derek quickly put his clipboard under his arm. You know what? We'll come back another time when you're more cooperative. Yeah, Tony said, backing toward their car. But this isn't over. The HOA will hear about your attitude. The two men got in their white sedan and drove away quickly. Marcus watched them go, memorizing their license plate number. His mind was already working, analyzing what had just happened. These were not HOA officers. They were criminals of some kind, and they were specifically targeting him because he owned guns. But how did they know about his firearms? And what did they really want? Marcus went inside his house and called Mrs. Chen, the real HOA president. She answered on the second ring. Hello, Mrs. Chen. This is Marcus Thompson from Maple Street. I just had two men at my house claiming to be HOA security officers. They wanted to inspect my home. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then Mrs. Chen said, Mr. Thompson, we don't have any security officers, and we certainly don't do mandatory inspections. Can you describe these men? Marcus told her about Derek and Tony, including their names and what they looked like. Mrs. Chen sounded worried. This is very concerning, she said. You're not the first person to report something like this. Mrs. Garcia on Oak Street called me last week about two men who came to her house with the same story, and Mr. Peterson on Pine Street mentioned something similar. What did you tell them to do? Marcus asked. I told them to call the police if it happened again. Mr. Thompson, I think you should file a report right away. These men are not from our HOA, and they have no right to enter anyone's home. After Marcus hung up, he sat in his kitchen and thought about the situation. In the military, he had learned that criminals often used official-sounding stories to gain access to homes. These fake HOA officers were probably planning to rob him, specifically targeting his guns. But they had made one big mistake. They had chosen the wrong house. Marcus Thompson was not just any homeowner. He was a trained Navy SEAL who knew how to handle threats, and now he was going to find out exactly who these men were and what they wanted. He picked up his phone again. It was time to call some old friends who could help him investigate these fake officers. If they thought they could intimidate a retired SEAL, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Marcus spent the rest of Tuesday thinking about his encounter with the fake HOA officers. That evening, when Sarah came home from work, he told her what had happened. "Two men came to the house today claiming they needed to inspect our home," he said as they sat at the kitchen table. "They said they were from the HOA, but Mrs. Chen told me we don't have any security officers." Sarah looked worried. "What did they want exactly?" "They claimed they were doing safety inspections, but they specifically mentioned unauthorized weapons. They knew I owned guns, Sarah. Somehow they knew." Emma looked up from her homework. "That's creepy, Dad. How would strangers know about your gun collection?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to find out." Next morning, Marcus decided to visit his neighbor, Jim Morrison. Jim had mentioned he was retired from city work, but Marcus wanted to know more about his background. Something told him Jim might be helpful. Marcus knocked on Jim's door. The older man answered with a cup of coffee in his hand and a newspaper under his arm. "Morning, Marcus. What brings you by so early?" "I had some visitors yesterday that didn't seem right," Marcus said. "Two men claiming to be HOA security officers. Mrs. Chen says we don't have any such officers." Jim's face became serious. "Come inside. Let's talk about this." Jim's living room was neat and organized. Marcus noticed several law enforcement magazines on the coffee table and a framed certificate on the wall from the police department. "Jim, what exactly did you do for the city?" Marcus asked. Jim smiled. "I was a detective for 32 years. Retired 5 years ago. Now I spend my time reading and working in my garden." He pointed to the certificate. "That's for my retirement ceremony." Marcus felt relieved. He had good instincts about people, and Jim had seemed trustworthy from the start. "I think those men who came to my house yesterday were criminals." "Tell me everything," Jim said, pulling out a small notebook. "Start from the beginning." Marcus described Derek and Tony in detail, their appearance, their car, their fake badges, and their questions about weapons. Jim took notes and asked good questions like a real detective. "You said they knew about your guns?" Jim asked. "Yes. They specifically mentioned unauthorized weapons and improper storage. But I've been very careful about keeping my firearms private. I never talk about them with neighbors." Jim tapped his pen on his notebook. "There are several ways criminals find out about gun owners. They watch gun stores and follow people home. They check public records. Some even monitor social media for photos that might show weapons." "I don't use social media much," Marcus said, "and I'm always careful when I go to the gun range." "What about when you moved in? Did the moving company handle your gun safe?" Marcus thought about this. "Yes, they moved it from the truck to my basement. It was clearly labeled as a gun safe." "That's probably how they found out," Jim said. "Moving companies sometimes have employees who pass information to criminals, or someone could have seen the safe being moved and told the wrong people." This made sense to Marcus. On moving day, several neighbors had been watching from their windows. Anyone could have seen the gun safe and figured out what it was. "Jim, Mrs. Chen said other people in the neighborhood got similar visits. Have you heard anything?" Jim nodded. "Actually, yes. Mrs. Garcia on Oak Street called me about a week ago. She was shaken up by two men who came to her house with the same story. And Bob Peterson mentioned something similar." "Do Mrs. Garcia and Mr. Peterson own guns?" "I believe they do. Mrs. Garcia's husband was in the Army, and Bob is a hunter. This is definitely a pattern." Marcus felt his anger rising. These criminals were targeting veterans and law-abiding gun owners. They were probably planning to break into homes when families were away and steal expensive firearms. "What should we do?" Marcus asked. "First, we need to document everything," Jim said. "I still have contacts at the police department. We should file reports and see if there have been similar incidents in other neighborhoods." "Good idea. What else?" Jim looked thoughtful. "We need to warn the other potential targets. If these men are going after gun owners in our neighborhood, there might be more victims we don't know about yet. Marcus liked Jim's methodical approach. It reminded him of military planning: gather intelligence, assess the threat, and develop a response plan. There's something else, Marcus said. I didn't tell those men I was in the military, I just said I was retired from the Navy. But I have a feeling they might come back. What branch of the Navy were you in? Jim asked. Marcus hesitated. He had been keeping his SEAL background private, but Jim was a retired detective and they were dealing with a potential criminal situation. It might be time to trust him. I was a Navy SEAL for 15 years, Marcus said quietly. Jim's eyebrows went up. A SEAL? Well, that changes things. If these criminals come back, they have no idea what they're walking into. I don't want to hurt anyone, Marcus said quickly. I just want to protect my family and neighbors. Of course. But it's good to know we have someone with your training involved. These fake HOA officers are probably small-time criminals who prey on what they think are easy targets. Marcus and Jim spent the next hour planning their response. They would contact the police and file official reports. Jim would call Mrs. Garcia and Mr. Peterson to get their stories. Marcus would quietly reach out to other neighbors to see if anyone else had been approached. One more thing, Jim said as Marcus prepared to leave. Do you think these men will be back? Marcus thought about Derek and Tony's behavior. They had seemed frustrated when he refused to let them in. They had also made threats about HOA fines and consequences. Yes, Marcus said. I think they'll be back. Criminals like this don't give up easily, especially if they think there are valuable guns to steal. Then we need to be ready for them, Jim said. That afternoon, Marcus called Mrs. Chen and asked her to organize a neighborhood meeting. He didn't tell her about his military background, but he suggested that residents needed to know about the fake HOA officers. That's an excellent idea, Mrs. Chen said. I'll send out an email today. We can meet Friday evening at the community center. Marcus also made a few phone calls to his old Navy contacts. Without giving too many details, he asked if they knew anything about criminal groups targeting veterans or gun owners. One of his former teammates, who now worked for the FBI, promised to check their databases. By Wednesday evening, Marcus had a clearer picture of the threat. Jim had confirmed that at least 4 families in the neighborhood had been approached by the fake officers. All of them were gun owners. All of them had refused to allow the inspections. They're definitely casing the neighborhood, Jim said when he and Marcus met again. The question is, when will they make their move? Marcus had been thinking about this too. If I were planning a robbery, I'd want to know when people aren't home. They're probably watching our daily routines now. So we need to be extra careful, Jim said. That night, Marcus sat in his living room and looked out the window at his quiet street. Everything looked normal and peaceful. But he knew that somewhere out there, Derek and Tony were planning their next move. Marcus had spent years protecting his country from enemies overseas. Now he had to protect his family and neighbors from criminals in his own backyard. The retired SEAL was ready for whatever came next. By Thursday morning, Marcus had turned his home office into a command center. He spread out a map of Oakwood estates on his desk and marked the homes where the fake HOA officers had visited. There was a clear pattern. They were targeting houses where they suspected gun owners lived. Jim Morrison came over with coffee and his own notes. I talked to Mrs. Garcia and Bob Peterson last night, he said. Both of them gave me detailed descriptions of the men who visited them. It's definitely the same 2 guys, Derek and Tony. Marcus looked at Jim's notes. Mrs. Garcia's husband served in the Army. Bob Peterson is a hunter. All of us have military or hunting backgrounds. These criminals are doing their homework. There's more, Jim said. I called my old partner at the police department. They've had similar reports in 3 other neighborhoods across the county. Always the same story. Fake HOA officers looking for weapons. This was bigger than Marcus had thought. So this isn't just our neighborhood. They're running this scam all over the area. Right. And in 2 cases, the homes were burglarized within a week after the fake inspections. The thieves knew exactly where to find the gun safes. Marcus felt his anger growing. These weren't just random criminals. They were organized and had been doing this for a while. What did the police tell you? They're taking it seriously now. That there's a pattern. Detective Sarah Williams is handling the case. She wants to meet with us tomorrow. Marcus nodded. Having law enforcement involved was good, but he knew it might not be enough. Police could only react after crimes happened. Marcus preferred to be proactive. That afternoon, Marcus got a return call from his former Navy teammate, Rick Chen, who now worked for the FBI in Washington, D.C. "Marcus, good to hear from you," Rick said. "I looked into those criminal groups you asked about. There's been an increase in organized thefts targeting gun collectors and veterans. The FBI has several open cases. Any leads on who's behind it? A few different groups. Some are local gangs looking to steal guns for resale. Others are more organized. They sell stolen weapons to out-of-state buyers. The common factor is they all use similar tactics to identify targets." Marcus told Rick about the fake HOA officers in his neighborhood. Rick listened carefully and asked detailed questions. "This fits the pattern we're seeing," Rick said. "These groups often pose as officials or inspectors to gain access to homes. Marcus, you need to be careful. Some of these criminals are dangerous." "I can handle myself," Marcus said. "I know you can. But they might not come alone next time, and they might be armed." After the call, Marcus realized he needed to prepare for the possibility that Derek and Tony would return with more men or weapons. His military training kicked in as he began developing a security plan for his home and family. First, he improved his home's defenses. He installed motion sensor lights around his property and checked all his door and window locks. He also set up a small security camera system that would record anyone approaching his house. Next, Marcus talked to Sarah and Emma about safety procedures. Without scaring them, he explained that they might be dealing with criminals and that everyone needed to be extra careful. "If anyone comes to the house claiming to be from the HOA or any other official organization, don't let them in," he told his family. "Call me immediately, no matter where I am." Emma looked worried. "Dad, are we in danger?" Marcus sat down next to his daughter. "Probably not. But these men are criminals, and I want to make sure our family is safe." "That's what dads do." Sarah squeezed his hand. "What can we do to help?" "Just be aware of your surroundings. If you see that white sedan or those two men anywhere near our house or your school, call me right away." Marcus also reached out to other neighbors who might be targets. He visited Mr. Rodriguez, who lived 2 streets over and had a military sticker on his truck. He found out that Mr. Rodriguez was a Marine veteran who owned several hunting rifles. "2 men came by my house Monday," Mr. Rodriguez confirmed. "Same story about HOA inspections. I told them to get lost." "Good," Marcus said. "But they might come back. We need to watch out for each other." Marcus was building a network of aware neighbors who could help spot the criminals if they returned. He gave his phone number to 6 different families and asked them to call if they saw anything suspicious. On Friday evening, Mrs. Chen held the neighborhood meeting she had promised. About 30 residents showed up at the community center. Marcus sat in the back and listened as Mrs. Chen explained the situation. "We've had reports of men posing as HOA security officers," she said. "These are not real HOA employees. They are criminals trying to get into your homes." Several people raised their hands with questions. One woman asked, "What do they want?" Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable. "We believe they're looking for valuable items to steal later." Marcus knew this was only part of the truth, but he understood why Mrs. Chen didn't mention guns specifically. Not everyone in the neighborhood needed to know that gun owners were being targeted. After the meeting, Jim introduced Marcus to Detective Sarah Williams, who had come to observe. She was a woman in her 40s with short red hair and intelligent eyes. "Mr. Thompson, Jim tells me you had direct contact with these suspects," she said. "Yes, they came to my house Tuesday morning." Marcus gave her a detailed description of Derek and Tony, including their license plate number. "This is very helpful," Detective Williams said. "We're working with other jurisdictions on this case. These men are part of a larger criminal network." "What's your plan?" Marcus asked. "We're setting up surveillance in the affected neighborhoods. If they come back, we'll be ready." Marcus appreciated the police response, but he had his doubts about how effective surveillance would be. Derek and Tony seemed smart enough to spot police cars or unmarked vehicles. That night, Marcus cleaned and checked his personal firearms. He wasn't planning to start a fight, but if these criminals brought violence to his family, he would be ready to defend them. He also called his neighbor Jim. "I think they'll be back this weekend," Marcus said. "Criminals like this usually work, when they think people are relaxed and off guard." "I agree," Jim said. "I'll keep my eyes open." Marcus had one more preparation to make. He called Rick at the FBI and asked for a favor. "Rick, if things go bad here, I might need backup. Can you give me a direct number for emergency contact?" "Absolutely. And Marcus, if these guys show up, again, try to get photos or video if you can do it safely. The FBI would love to identify these suspects." As Marcus went to bed Friday night, he felt like a soldier again. He had identified the enemy, gathered intelligence, prepared his defenses, and coordinated with allies. Now all he had to do was wait for the next move. He didn't have to wait long. Saturday morning would bring unexpected visitors to Maple Street, and this time Derek and Tony wouldn't be coming alone. Saturday morning started peacefully. Marcus was in his garage working on his truck when Sarah left to take Emma shopping at the mall. It was a beautiful fall day, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of children playing in nearby yards. At exactly 10:30, Marcus heard cars pulling into his driveway. He looked up to see not one but two vehicles. The same white sedan from Tuesday was there, along with a black SUV. 4 men got out of the cars. Marcus recognized Derek and Tony immediately. The 2 new men were bigger and looked more dangerous. One was a heavy man with a shaved head and tattoos on his arms. The other was tall and thin with cold eyes and a scar on his cheek. Marcus's military training took over instantly. 4 against 1 was not good odds, especially in an open garage where he had no cover, but he was not going to back down from these criminals. "Mr. Thompson," Derek called out as the 4 men walked toward him. "We tried to be nice on Tuesday, but you wouldn't cooperate. Now we're back with proper authority." Derek held up an official-looking document. "This is a court order requiring you to allow our inspection. You can't refuse this time." Marcus knew immediately that the document was fake. Real court orders came through the mail or were served by sheriff's deputies, not by the same criminals who had lied to him before. "Let me see that court order," Marcus said calmly. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked toward the men, but not too close. Derek held the paper out, but when Marcus reached for it, Derek pulled it back. "You can read it after we're done with our inspection. Now step aside." The man with the shaved head stepped forward. "We don't have time for games, old man. Move out of the way." Marcus almost smiled at being called old man. At 42, he was in better shape than all 4 of these criminals. His years of SEAL training had taught him to stay calm under pressure and use his brain instead of just his muscles. "Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you one more time to leave my property," Marcus said. His voice was steady and controlled. "You have no legal authority here." Tony laughed. "Legal authority? We've got 4 men and you've got none. That's all the authority we need." The man with the scar spoke for the first time. His voice was rough and mean. "We know you've got guns in there, Thompson. Make this easy on yourself and just let us in." Now, Marcus was certain about their real purpose. They weren't here to inspect anything. They were here to case his house for a future robbery, or maybe even to rob him right now. "How do you know I have firearms?" Marcus asked. Derek grinned. "We do our research. We know exactly what you've got and where you keep it." This was a mistake on Derek's part. He had just admitted to stalking Marcus and his family. Marcus felt his anger rising, but he kept it under control. Anger made people careless, and he couldn't afford to be careless with 4 criminals in his driveway. "Here's what's going to happen," the bald man said, pointing his finger at Marcus. "You're going to step aside and we're going to go into your house. If you cooperate, nobody gets hurt." "And if I don't cooperate?" Marcus asked. The man with the scar smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Then things get unpleasant for you and your family." The mention of his family crossed a line for Marcus. These criminals had just threatened Sarah and Emma. That changed everything. Marcus took a step back, positioning himself better in case things turned violent. "My family isn't here right now, so if you want to threaten someone, threaten me." Derek seemed to realize that Marcus wasn't going to scare easily. "Look, we don't want any trouble. Just let us do our job, and we'll be gone in 20 minutes. "Your job," Marcus said. "Your job is breaking into people's homes and stealing their property." Tony's face got red. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Marcus said. "You've been targeting gun owners all over the county. You case their homes with fake inspections, then come back later to rob them." The four men looked surprised that Marcus knew so much about their operation. Derek and Tony exchanged worried glances. "You're wrong about that," Derek said, but his voice wasn't as confident as before. Marcus decided to push them harder. "Derek Walsh and Tony Martinez, right? You've hit at least 3 other neighborhoods in the past month. You always work in pairs, posing as HOA officers or city inspectors." Now all 4 men looked nervous. They hadn't expected Marcus to know their names or their methods. "How do you know all that?" the bald man demanded. Marcus smiled. "I used to work in intelligence. Did you really think you could run a scam in my neighborhood without me finding out about it?" This was only partly true. Marcus had been in Navy intelligence as part of his SEAL training, but most of his information had come from Jim and Detective Williams. However, the criminals didn't need to know that. The man with the scar stepped closer to Marcus. "Intelligence, or not, you're still outnumbered 4-1. Marcus didn't move. "Are you sure about that?" On cue, Jim Morrison appeared from behind the black SUV. He had approached quietly through Marcus's backyard and was now standing behind the criminals. "Actually, it's 4 against 2, Jim said calmly. "And I should mention that I'm a retired police detective and my partner here is former military." The 4 criminals spun around to face Jim, then looked back at Marcus. They were clearly confused and starting to panic. "Plus," Marcus said, checking his watch, "the police should be arriving any minute now. I called them as soon as I saw you. Pull into my driveway." This was also true. Marcus had called Detective Williams the moment he saw the 2 cars. She had promised to send patrol units immediately. Derek looked at his 3 partners. "Maybe we should go." But the bald man wasn't ready to give up. "No way. We've come too far to back down now." He started walking toward Marcus with his fists clenched. "Old soldier or not, I'm going into that house." This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. As the man got within arm's reach, Marcus's SEAL training took over completely. The bald man threw a clumsy punch at Marcus's face. Marcus easily blocked it and responded with a quick strike to the man's solar plexus. The criminal doubled over, gasping for air. The man with the scar rushed at Marcus from the side. Marcus grabbed the man's arm, used his momentum against him, and threw him to the ground with a perfect hip toss. The man landed hard on the concrete driveway. Derek and Tony just stood there with their mouths open. They had expected to intimidate a regular suburban homeowner. Instead, they were watching their partners get defeated by someone who moved like a professional fighter. "Like I said," Marcus said calmly, not even breathing hard, "you gentlemen should leave." In the distance, they could all hear police sirens getting closer. The police sirens were getting louder, but they were still a few minutes away. Marcus stood over the 2 men he had just defeated, while Derek and Tony backed toward their cars. Jim Morrison moved to block their escape route. "You made a big mistake coming here today," Marcus said to Derek. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it that made all 4 criminals nervous. The bald man was still on his knees, trying to catch his breath. The man with the scar was sitting on the ground, holding his shoulder where he had landed hard on the concrete. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Derek said, trying to sound tough. But his voice was shaking. Marcus almost laughed. "Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Derek Walsh, age 34, lives in apartment 2B on Oak Street, downtown. Tony Martinez, age 31, drives a blue pickup truck when he's not using stolen license plates." Both men's faces went white. Marcus had gotten this information from Detective Williams and his FBI contact, but the criminals didn't know that. "Your friend with the bald head is Mike Stevens," Marcus continued, pointing to the man who was still gasping for air. "He's got a record for armed robbery and assault. And your buddy with the scar is Johnny Price. He just got out of prison 6 months ago." The man with the scar, Johnny stared at Marcus in shock. How do you know all that? Like I told you, I used to work in intelligence. Did you think you could run a criminal operation without leaving a trail? This wasn't entirely true. Marcus had only learned their names and backgrounds in the past day from his law enforcement contacts, but his military training had taught him the value of psychological warfare. Making enemies think you knew more than you actually did was often just as effective as having real intelligence. Derek was sweating now. Look, man, we don't want any trouble. We'll just leave and never come back. It's too late for that, Marcus said. You threatened my family. You've been terrorizing my neighbors, and you just committed assault when your friend tried to attack me. Jim spoke up from behind the group. As a retired police officer, I witnessed everything that happened. Here, these men trespassed on private property, made criminal threats, and initiated physical violence. Marcus walked closer to Derek and Tony, who backed up against their white sedan. Here's what you don't understand. I spent 15 years protecting this country from people like you. I didn't retire from the Navy to let criminals threaten my family in my own driveway. What branch of the Navy? Derek asked, though he probably didn't really want to know the answer. Navy SEALs, Marcus said simply. All four criminals looked sick. Even people who didn't know much about the military had heard of Navy SEALs. They knew these were some of the most dangerous soldiers in the world. Mike Stevens finally caught his breath enough to speak. A SEAL? Aw, man, we're screwed. Yes, you are, Marcus agreed. But here's the really bad news. I haven't been sitting around doing nothing since you first came to my house. I've been investigating your little operation. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them several photos he had taken over the past few days. There were pictures of their cars, their license plates, and even some surveillance photos that Detective Williams had shared with him. I know about the house you robbed on Elm Street last month, Marcus said. I know about the veteran's family you terrorized on Pine Avenue. I even know about your fence, the guy who buys the stolen guns from you. This last part was a bluff. The police suspected there was someone buying the stolen weapons, but they hadn't identified him yet. However, Marcus's confident tone made the criminals believe he knew everything. Tony looked at Derek with panic in his eyes. Man, we need to get out of here right now. But Marcus wasn't done. You want to know the really interesting part? The FBI has been tracking your network for months. They know about the other crews working in different counties. They know about the gun-running operation. Johnny Price tried to stand up, wincing in pain. The FBI? That's right. This isn't just a local police matter anymore. You're looking at federal charges for conspiracy, gun trafficking, and organized criminal activity. Again, this was only partially true. The FBI was interested in the case, but Marcus was making it sound bigger than it actually was. However, his confident delivery and specific details made the criminals believe every word. The police sirens were very close now. Marcus estimated they had maybe 2 minutes before patrol cars arrived. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, using the command voice he had developed during his military career. You're going to stay right here until the police arrive. You're going to cooperate fully with their investigation. And you're going to tell them about every house you've targeted and every gun you've stolen. Derek shook his head. We're not saying anything without lawyers. Marcus shrugged. That's your choice. But the FBI already has enough evidence to put you away for 10 years. If you cooperate, maybe you can get that reduced to 5 years. If you don't cooperate, you'll probably die in prison. Mike Stevens looked around at his partners. Maybe we should listen to him. Shut up, Mike, Derek snapped. Marcus decided to apply more pressure. Derek, let me tell you what's going to happen. To you personally. The FBI knows you're the leader of this crew. They know about your apartment, your bank accounts, and your girlfriend Lisa, who works at the diner downtown. Derek's face went completely white. How do you know about Lisa? Marcus didn't actually know anything about Lisa. He had just guessed that a criminal like Derek might have a girlfriend, and the name Lisa was common enough that it might be right. Derek's reaction told him he had guessed correctly. Like I said, I know everything about your operation. The question is whether you want to make this easy on yourself or hard. The first police car turned onto Maple Street, its siren wailing and lights flashing. Marcus could see Detective Williams in the passenger seat. "Last chance, Derek," Marcus said. "Cooperate with the investigation, or spend the rest of your life in a federal prison." Derek looked at the approaching police car, then at his 3 injured and frightened partners, then at Marcus and Jim. He seemed to realize that his criminal career was over. "Okay," Derek said quietly. "We'll cooperate." Tony stared at him in shock. "Derek, what are you doing?" "I'm being smart, Tony. This guy knows everything." "The FBI knows everything. We're done." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good choice. Now put your hands where the officers can see them and don't make any sudden movements." As the police cars surrounded his driveway, Marcus felt a satisfaction he hadn't experienced since his military days. These criminals had thought they could prey on innocent families in his neighborhood. They had thought wrong. The retired Navy SEAL had protected his community, just like he had once protected his country. 3 police cars surrounded Marcus's driveway within minutes. Detective Sarah Williams jumped out of the first car, followed by 4 uniformed officers. She quickly assessed the scene. 4 criminals with their hands visible, Marcus and Jim, standing calmly nearby and no weapons drawn. "Mr. Thompson, are you and Mr. Morrison okay?" Detective Williams asked. "We're fine," Marcus replied. "These 4 men trespassed on my property, made criminal threats, and 2 of them tried to assault me." Detective Williams looked at the bald man who was still catching his breath and the man with the scar who was holding his shoulder. "I see they didn't succeed." "No, ma'am. They did not." The detective turned to the uniformed officers. "Please, arrest all 4 suspects, read them their rights, and search them for weapons." As the officers moved in to handcuff Derek, Tony, Mike, and Johnny, Detective Williams pulled Marcus and Jim aside. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said, pulling out her notebook. Marcus gave her a detailed account of the morning's events. He explained how the 4 men had arrived with fake court documents, made threats against his family, and initiated physical violence when he refused to let them into his house. They also admitted to targeting gun owners and having detailed knowledge of my firearms, Marcus added. Derek specifically said they knew what I had and where I kept it. Jim confirmed Marcus's story and added his own observations as a retired detective. "These men clearly came here planning to commit a crime. When Mr. Thompson didn't cooperate, they escalated to threats and violence." Detective Williams looked impressed. "It sounds like you handled the situation perfectly. Did they say anything about other crimes or victims?" "Derek seemed to panic when I mentioned specific addresses where robberies had occurred," Marcus said. "I think he's ready to talk." At that moment, one of the uniformed officers called Detective Williams over to the white sedan. "Detective, you need to see this." In the trunk of the car, the officers had found several items that made the case much stronger. There were fake badges and ID cards for various organizations. There were lock-picking tools and crowbars. Most importantly, there was a notebook with addresses and notes about different neighborhoods. "This is a goldmine," Detective Williams said, flipping through the notebook. "They've got detailed information about dozens of homes across 5 different counties." Marcus looked over her shoulder at the notebook. He could see his own address listed along with notes that read, "Navy vet, gun safe in basement, wife and daughter leave house 8 a.m. weekdays." "They've been watching my family," Marcus said, feeling his anger rise again. "It looks like they've been watching a lot of families," Detective Williams replied. "This notebook is evidence of a conspiracy that goes way beyond what we thought." One of the officers approached with Derek Walsh in handcuffs. "Detective, this one says he wants to make a deal. He's asking for a lawyer, but he also says he has information about a bigger operation." Detective Williams looked at Derek. "Mr. Walsh, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do you understand these rights?" "Yes," Derek said miserably. "But I want to talk. This whole thing has gotten way out of hand." "Then, we'll continue this conversation at the police station with your lawyer present." As the criminals were loaded into police cars, Marcus's phone rang. It was Rick Chen from the FBI. "Marcus, I just heard about the arrests. My sources tell me you caught 4 suspects with a treasure trove of evidence." "That's right. It looks like their operation was bigger than we thought. Can you meet me at the police station in an hour? The FBI is officially taking over this case, and we need your statement." Marcus agreed and hung up. Detective Williams overheard the conversation. "The FBI?" she asked. "I have some contacts from my military days," Marcus explained. "They've been tracking similar crimes across multiple states." An hour later, Marcus and Jim were sitting in a conference room at the police station with Detective Williams, FBI agent Rick Chen, and 2 other federal agents. The 4 criminals were in separate holding cells, and their lawyers were on the way. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Chen said, "thanks to your actions today, we've broken up a criminal network that's been operating for over a year. The evidence we found in their car connects them to at least 15 home invasions and the theft of over 100 firearms." 15. Marcus was shocked. "We only knew about 4 or 5. The notebook they kept had detailed surveillance notes on 43 different homes. They were very organized and very patient. They would watch families for weeks before deciding whether to target them," Detective Williams added. "Derek Walsh has agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's already given us the name and location of the person who was buying the stolen guns." "What about the other 3?" Jim asked. "Mike Stevens and Johnny Price are career criminals with long records. They'll probably get 10 to 15 years each. Tony Martinez is younger, and this was his first major crime. He might get 5 to 7 years if he cooperates." Agent Chen opened a file folder. "Here's what we've learned so far. This crew was part of a larger network operating in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. They specifically targeted military, veterans, and law enforcement officers because they assumed these people would have valuable firearms." "How did they identify their targets?" Marcus asked. "Multiple ways. Sometimes they followed people home from gun stores or shooting ranges. Sometimes they monitored social media for photos that showed weapons. They even had someone at a moving company who would tip them off when gun safes were being delivered." This confirmed Marcus's suspicion about how they had learned about his firearms. "The good news," Detective Williams said, "is that we've recovered most of the stolen guns. The fence they were using kept detailed records, thinking it would protect him legally. Instead, it's going to help us return the weapons to their rightful owners." Agent Chen looked at Marcus with respect. "Your military training and quick thinking prevented what could have been a very dangerous situation. If you had let them into your house, there's no telling what might have happened." "I was just protecting my family," Marcus said. "You did more than that. You protected your entire community. Based on their notebook, they were planning to hit 6 more houses in your neighborhood over the next month." As the meeting wrapped up, Detective Williams handed Marcus her business card. "If you ever decide you want a second career in law enforcement, give me a call. We could use someone with your skills and instincts." Marcus smiled. "Thanks, but I think I'll stick to being a suburban dad. Although this has been more exciting than I expected retirement to be." Agent Chen laughed. "Something tells me that criminals in your area will think twice before targeting your neighborhood again." When Marcus finally got home that evening, Sarah and Emma were waiting for him with worried expressions. The news of the arrest had already spread through the neighborhood. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma asked, hugging him tightly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. The bad guys are in jail and they won't be bothering anyone else." Sarah looked at her husband with pride and concern. "I knew you could handle yourself. But 4 men?" Marcus shrugged. They weren't expecting to deal with someone who had professional training. Plus, Jim helped and the police arrived quickly. That night, as Marcus sat on his front porch looking at his peaceful neighborhood, he reflected on the events of the past week. He had come to Oakwood Estates looking for a quiet retirement. Instead, he had found himself protecting his community, just like he had once protected his country. It felt good to be useful again. 2 weeks after the arrests, Marcus was featured on the front page of the local newspaper. The headline read, "Retired Navy SEAL Stops Criminal Gang in Oakwood Estates." The article explained how his quick thinking and military training had protected the entire neighborhood from an organized crime ring. Marcus didn't particularly enjoy the attention, but he understood it served a good purpose. The story would warn other criminals that the community was not an easy target. That evening, Mrs. Chen organized a special neighborhood meeting to thank Marcus and discuss new safety measures. The community center was packed with residents who wanted to hear the full story and learn how to protect themselves. "Before we start," Mrs. Chen said, "I want to thank Marcus Thompson for his courage. and Jim Morrison for his assistance. Because of their actions, our neighborhood is safer for everyone. The crowd applauded. Marcus stood up briefly to acknowledge the thanks, then sat back down. He preferred to let Mrs. Chen run the meeting. Now, Mrs. Chen continued, we need to discuss how we can prevent something like this from happening again. Marcus has agreed to share some security tips with us. Marcus walked to the front of the room, looking out at his neighbors, families with children, elderly couples, young professionals. He felt the same protective instinct he had experienced during his military service. The most important thing, Marcus began, is to verify anyone who claims to be an official. Real HOA officers, city inspectors, or utility workers will always have proper identification and documentation. If someone comes to your door claiming to represent an organization, ask to see their credentials and call the organization to confirm. A woman in the front row raised her hand. What if they seem threatening or won't leave? Don't let them pressure you, Marcus said. No legitimate official will threaten you or demand immediate entry to your home. If someone becomes aggressive, call the police immediately. Jim Morrison stood up to add his perspective. As a retired detective, I can tell you that criminals often rely on people being polite and trusting. Don't worry about being rude to someone who shows up uninvited at your door. Your safety is more important than their feelings. Marcus nodded. Jim's right. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. A man in the back asked, how did these criminals know which houses to target? They did research, Marcus explained. They watched people coming and going from gun stores. They monitored social media for photos that might show weapons. They even had an inside source at a moving company. This made several people in the audience look worried. Don't be paranoid, Marcus said quickly. Just be smart, be careful about what you post on social media. Vary your routines occasionally, and most importantly, look out for each other. Mrs. Chen took over again. Which brings us to our new Neighborhood Watch program. We're going to organize groups of neighbors who will keep an eye on each other's homes and report suspicious activity. Over the next hour, they divided the neighborhood into sections and assigned coordinators for each area. Marcus agreed to help train the coordinators in what to look for and how to report suspicious activity safely. After the meeting, several neighbors approached Marcus personally. Bob Peterson, the hunter who had also been targeted by the fake HOA officers, shook his hand vigorously. Marcus, I can't thank you enough. My wife was terrified after those men came to our house. Knowing they're in jail makes her feel so much better. Mrs. Garcia, whose husband had served in the army, had tears in her eyes. You're a hero, Mr. Thompson. You protected all of us. Marcus felt uncomfortable with being called a hero. I just did what anyone would do to protect their family and neighbors. But Emma, who had been listening nearby, disagreed. Dad, not everyone would have figured out they were criminals. And not everyone could have stopped 4 men by themselves. Sarah squeezed her husband's arm. She's right. You used your training to help people just like you did in the military. 3 months later, Marcus had settled into a new routine. He still went on his morning runs and worked on home projects. But now he also served as the unofficial security consultant for Oakwood Estates. The HOA had implemented several of his suggestions. They created an official protocol for any future inspections or visits from outside organizations. They installed better lighting on some of the darker streets. Most importantly, they established a communication network so neighbors could quickly alert each other about suspicious activity. Marcus also helped organize self-defense classes at the community center. Jim Morrison taught basic awareness and avoidance techniques, while Marcus showed people simple defensive moves they could use if attacked. The goal isn't to turn everyone into fighters, Marcus explained to one class. The goal is to give you confidence and options if you ever find yourself in danger. One evening, as Marcus was grilling dinner in his backyard, Detective Williams stopped by with an update on the case. Derek Walsh and Tony Martinez were sentenced today, she said. Derek got 8 years, Tony got 5. Mike Stevens and Johnny Price are still awaiting trial, but they'll probably get 12 to 15 years each. What about the fence who was buying the stolen guns? Marcus asked. He got 6 years and had to pay restitution to all the victims. We recovered almost 90% of the stolen firearms. Detective Williams accepted Marcus's offer of a burger and joined the family for dinner. As they ate, she told them about other cases where the evidence from the Oakwood Estates arrests had helped solve crimes in different states. The FBI says this network was responsible for over $2 million in stolen property, she said. Your actions had a much bigger impact than just protecting your neighborhood. After Detective Williams left, Marcus sat on his porch with Sarah and Emma watching the sunset. The neighborhood was peaceful and quiet. Children were playing in yards while their parents worked in gardens or washed cars. Do you miss it? Sarah asked. Miss what? The excitement, the military life, being in dangerous situations? Marcus thought about this question. Sometimes I miss the sense of purpose and the teamwork, but I don't miss the danger or being away from you and Emma. What about what happened with those criminals? Emma asked. That was dangerous, but you seemed, I don't know, like you were in your element. Marcus smiled at his perceptive daughter. It felt good to use my training to protect people again, but I'd rather have a boring, peaceful life with my family than any amount of excitement. Even if it means dealing with fake HOA officers, Sarah teased. Especially then, Marcus laughed. Although I have to admit, it was satisfying to show those guys that they picked the wrong neighborhood to mess with. 6 months later, Oakwood Estates had become known as one of the safest neighborhoods in the county. The crime rate had dropped to nearly zero, and property values had increased. Real estate agents mentioned the strong community security when showing homes to potential buyers. Marcus had found something he hadn't expected in retirement, a way to continue serving others while still being present for his family. He wasn't fighting overseas enemies anymore, but he was helping create a safe haven where families could live without fear. Some people might have seen the confrontation with the criminals as just one dramatic weekend, but Marcus knew it was something more important. It was proof that a community of people looking out for each other could overcome any threat. As he had learned in the military, the best defense was preparation, awareness, and good people standing together. Oakwood Estates now had all three, and if any other criminals were thinking about targeting his neighborhood, they would find the same thing Derek Walsh and his crew had discovered, that Marcus Thompson and his neighbors were not easy victims. The retired Navy SEAL had found his new mission, protecting the place he called home.